For now, McKinley, I think, is B.
Yeah, definitely B tier.
And thanks, unfortunately, to his untimely getting shot in the face, we come to Theodore Roosevelt. Teddy, we love Teddy. Teddy's a good guy.
Teddy is one of the best.
Yeah. I mean, just what a badass. What a fascinating life. Like, this is a guy who was like a beat cop in New York. He was a cowboy in the Dakotas. He fought in Cuba. I mean, he was a conservationist. The Rough Riders were his thing. He was all about the square deal. He was a big progressive in a lot of ways, a huge progressive. In fact, one fact I do know off the top of my head is that he was the first president, or one of the first ones, to invite a black man to dine with him in the White House. And that was a big controversy at the time, but it wasn't a big deal to him because he was, not someone who was down with the widespread discrimination. I'm not saying he was totally progressive in that regard, but he was certainly notably progressive compared to his predecessors. And he made America a lot stronger. He made the Navy stronger, and he basically put us into the race of imperialism in a lot of ways with the European countries. And the Panama Canal was a part of that. And the Great White Fleet was a part of that. So there you go. But I mean, yeah, it's an incredible life. It's an incredible story. Definitely a lot more right than wrong. I think Teddy is. I'm prepared to put Teddy in S tier. I think he did a fantastic job.
Yeah, I feel like that's the only appropriate place for him.
And
also, yeah, it was Teddy Roosevelt who got shot in the middle of a speech and then finished the speech.
He finished the fucking speech, yeah.
That's just badass.
Yeah, he's a badass. Absolutely, he's fucking awesome. And so he had some, what he later on decided were misplaced principles about the length of time he should be in office. He wanted to run again, but he didn't because he said, well, technically, because I took over most of what's-his-face's McKinley's second term, I've already technically served 2 terms, and I want to uphold the Washingtonian ideal, and so I'm not going to run again. And he gave power over to one William Howard Taft, the man who he would later describe as that fat fuck who stole the presidency from me and wouldn't give asked him for it. The thing about William Howard Taft is, well, the thing that everyone knows is that he was the one who was so large that he couldn't get him out of the bathtub. He got stuck in the bathtub. That's the thing that everyone
I've never
knows.
heard of that. Oh my god.
Oh, you've never heard of that story?
No, that's so funny.
I feel like that's the one fun fact everybody knows about William Howard Taft. He was a Republican, but he was a lot more conservative than Teddy was. And basically, yeah, he just, he believed his job was to pretty much do nothing. Don't piss anybody off. Don't rock the boat too much. He was the definition of just the steady Republican who you elect to do nothing and just hang out. Yeah, and Roosevelt challenged him for the renomination in 1912, and we'll get to that, which led to the election of the next guy. But I mean, Taft, if the one thing that everyone knows about you is this embarrassing personal anecdote about getting stuck in a bath one time, I feel like you're not that great.
No.
So, I don't know. I would say I wouldn't put him in the same league as Andrew Jackson, but I'd say he's a C.
Yeah, he's either C or F.
Yeah. Well, do you want to split the difference then?
I'd probably do C.
Okay.
No, I think C is more fitting.
All right. So Taft and Roosevelt completely split open the Republican Party in 1912, which opened the door to our next president, Woodrow Wilson, our next New Jerseyite. Now, Wilson, president during World War I. He was a somewhat progressive guy, not to the same degree as Roosevelt, but arguably more so than Taft. Of course, the big thing is he kept us out of World War I for 3 years, and then we had the what's it called? The name of the ship. The was it the Lusitania?
Mm.
I think so. Oh yes, well first the Zimmermann telegram, which was a fascinating little event in history where Germany telegrammed Mexico to say, hey Mexico, remember the Mexican-American War you lost like 70 years ago? Well, tell you what, if you invade the United States right now to distract them from joining the war in Europe, we'll help you later on with that. And that's it.
Yeah.
But hey, I mean, think about it though. I mean, you can get back all this land, and yeah. Anyway, obviously Mexico did not go for that, and it was intercepted by the British, who then passed it on to us, and so that pissed everybody off. And then you also had the unrestrained submarine warfare against the ships, many of which were American ships, so that pissed everybody off even more. And now we're in World War I, and the American Expeditionary Force, in many ways, because at this point, remember, the Russian Revolution was starting, so Russia's out. The American Expeditionary Force going in is really what allowed the Entente powers to push through and ultimately beat Germany and win the war. So that's pretty good. I mean, he was an effective wartime leader. And of course, after the war, you had the 14 points in the League of Nations. He was a guy who was pretty...
He vetoed the Prohibition Act, but was overridden by Congress.
Yeah.
So that's also, points to him.
Yeah, and also he was one of the first presidents to go to a European peace conference, the Paris Peace Conference.
Personally opposed women's suffrage in 1911 because he believed women lacked the public experience needed to be good voters.
Yeah, well, yeah, and so did the vast majority of political leaders at this time. But
yeah.
it was about to begin anyway, because I think that was ratified in like 1918, so it was about to happen regardless. The only really big knock on Wilson that I could say off the top of my head is he was pretty much a vegetable in his last couple of years in office. He had a few big strokes, and basically he couldn't do anything. For his last bit of time in office. Yeah, he suffered a severe stroke in 1919 that left him incapacitated, and his wife and doctor basically weekend at Bernie'd him for the last 2 years of his presidency.
Oh shit! He actually switched on his position of suffrage.
Yeah, well,
in 1911 he opposed it, but in 1918 he made a speech before Congress.
Yeah, well, he could see which way the wind was blowing because it was that was already picking up. So, but yeah, he was a vegetable in his last couple of years, and he was generally not. He was pretty down with segregation, which is also not great.
Yeah.
He wasn't like pushing it, but he wasn't against it either. So, so that's a knock against. But generally, I think Wilson does a pretty good job, and he's another New Jerseyite, another New Jersey guy. So I feel like I'm comfortable putting him as high as A, honestly.
Yeah, I was feeling A.
Because just the leadership in World War I, keeping us out, and then doing a good job once we were in, I think is very valuable.
Like, trying to establish a League of Nations too.
Exactly, which was very noble.
Important.
Very noble. Warren G. Harding. I feel like the thing with Warren G. Harding is just the corruption. You had the Teapot Dome scandal. You had a lot of different scandals. He was just. I don't know how corrupt he was personally, but a lot of corrupt people worked for him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I feel like he could have been stronger in that. And then, of course, in 1923, he died of a heart attack. So he was only in office for like 2 years. So. Can we think of any reason you're thinking C?
Yeah, I'm thinking C. They didn't really do much.
Yeah, I was thinking maybe D. Just because I couldn't really tell you easily what he did that was that good.
Fair.
But I'll
But
defer to you. If you want C,
I don't know,
let's.
because D we've kind of established as like these people are evil,
Yeah,
where
yeah.
C is just kind of, you know, middle leaning towards bad.
Yeah.
And if you don't really do anything, but you're kind of a dick, I feel like that's C territory.
Yeah, and so now we come to Calvin Coolidge, Silent Cal, our president for the majority of the Roaring Twenties, which is really funny because you could not imagine a less charismatic, more boring guy to preside over a very exciting time
Yeah.
in American history. But that's exactly what made him an attractive person for Warren G. Harding's vice president because nobody thought he would make any waves. Um, but then Harding died. Coolidge is in, and yeah, he was supported women's suffrage, vaguely opposed to prohibition, but obviously this was the big prohibition era, so he wasn't actively opposing it. Restored public confidence in the presidency after the many scandals of the Harding administration. Signed the Indian Citizenship Act, which granted citizenship to all Native Americans. So that's good. That's very good. And oversaw a period of rapid and expansive economic growth known as the Roaring Twenties, leaving office with considerable popularity.
Coolidge
Biographer,
was neither well versed nor very interested in world affairs. His focus was directed mainly at American business, especially pertaining to trade and maintaining the status quo.
yep, biographer Claude Fuess wrote, he embodied the spirit and hopes of the middle class, could interpret their longings and express their opinions. That he did represent the genius of the average is the most convincing proof of his strength. And he was a stalwart supporter of racial equality during a period of heightened racial tensions. And he also did a lot of laissez-faire economics. And there is debate to the extent to which Coolidge's economic policies contribute to the onset of the Great Depression. But in general, during his time as president, things were good for the most part. Uh, Roaring 20s, exciting stuff going on, planes flying in the air, radio in your house. That's crazy. Uh,
But like none of this came from him specifically. That's
no.
why I'm feeling B tier. Is because like
Hmm.
again, he also kind of just didn't really
Yeah.
do much and is not known for much.
Yeah. And I'm okay with B. So we'll say B. All right. Moving on to Herbert Hoover. Now, of course, everybody blames Mr. Hoover for not doing enough once the Great Depression kicked off to alleviate the people's suffering. He mostly continued on with Coolidge's laissez-faire policies, and he hoped that the Great Depression would be over pretty quickly and we can get back to the good stuff, the good times. That sadly was not the case. Yeah, I mean his presidency was dominated by the Depression. He scapegoated Mexicans for the Depression. Approximately 1 million Mexican Americans were forcibly repatriated to Mexico in a forced migration campaign known as the Mexican Repatriation. Scholars contend the campaign meets modern legal standards of ethnic cleansing. So that's not great.
No. Also, by the end of 1930, the national unemployment rate had reached 11.9%, and by mid 1931, it had jumped up to 15%.
Yeah, no, it was pretty terrible. And also the whole bonus army, that whole incident was him. And obviously he was so unbelievably unpopular by 1932. Roosevelt beat him in one of the largest landslides this country's ever seen. It was an extreme bygone conclusion. And so, yeah, Hoover, because he's abjectly failed to control and contain the Depression, I think he's probably D.
Yeah.
I don't know. Maybe he's going to hell. I don't know, but
I, I
I
don't
mean the ethnic
think
cleansing
so.
thing that
Well,
could
that's
be
that's
an
very true.
indication. in favor of hell.
But
So
I don't know. Given who else is in D tier, I think he fits in D tier.
okay. All right, FDR. Wow. Wow. So much to say about Franklin Delano Roosevelt. The New Deal, lifting the country out of the Great Depression, and then obviously World War II. I mean, the only president who's been elected not once, not twice, not 3 times, but 4 times. Almost all of them landslides.
So before that, most of these guys only ever served, a certain number of terms, 2 terms
at most.
Yeah. Then he served 4 terms.
4 terms. Well,
when
he was elected 4 times, and then he died in the 4th.
Well, yeah, but like when was it established that legally you could only
after him
run for after
during him? I think during the Truman years. That was when the
was it just like an unspoken rule before where everyone was we'll only do 2 terms?
Yeah, it's literally called like the Washingtonian tradition or something, Washingtonian standard. But because Washington got 2, nobody could have more than 2 until FDR.
And did he just like take more than that because of like wartime?
Well,
stuff and like I don't know.
So he first gets elected in 1932, gets reelected in 1936, and then there was a big question in the 1940 election: is he going to run again or not? Is he going to step down like all the other ones always have? Obviously, he didn't, and he ran again and he won. And I think that's because by 1940, the war clouds over Europe had already begun. Germany invaded Poland in 1939. Obviously, we weren't in the war yet. We wanted to stay out of the war. But Roosevelt believed he was the best guy to help he had already restarted the economy after the Depression. The New Deal was going well. And he said, well, and this was like we're starting to do Lend-Lease. And we're trying to help out the Brits because this is like 1940 is Battle of Britain. And it's like, we don't want to fight, but Britain and allies, we are going to give you anything you need to beat the Nazis. And yeah, and at that point, it was just the Nazis, because at this point, we were actually trying to be friendly with Japan.
Yeah.
We had even given them a peace medal at the time, trying to preserve friendly relations with Japan. But he was very concerned about what was happening in Europe. And so he's like, well, you know what? I don't think my vice president, John Nance Gardner, is going to do a good job. I don't think any Republican is going to do a better job. I want to preserve my New Deal. So let me just run again. And he did, and he won. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously the New Deal, Great Depression leadership, the World War II leadership, obviously. I think this is the second Roosevelt we have to put in S tier.
Yeah, no, I agree with that completely. I'm just like scanning through this, and I'm like, is there anything that he did that was bad? I mean, like, honestly, you could argue that running for more than 2 terms was bad in of itself, but like,
when you look
he was elected, like the people wanted him.
Well, that's the thing.
Clearly, he was doing something right. So,
and when you look at the New Deal, that literally remains the model of progressivism to this day. Yeah. Like when you look at America before the New Deal versus America after, we have arguably, and obviously this is a debate that you can have, but we have arguably never had a more progressive president than FDR relative to the times.
Oh, but Biden is the most progressive president in history.
Well, we'll get to him, but yeah, I mean, so as if that wasn't enough, he also won World War II. So so
him personally, like he just stepped out onto the beach at Normandy and was like, "Hey guys, cut it out." And then,
leadership. So
yeah.
But anyway, so yes, he's in for almost 20 years, and that brings us to Harry Truman. Truman comes in 1945. We've already beaten Germany. That's great, but we still got to beat Japan. We still got to fucking give it to them. And, we've got this program, this top secret situation that we've got going on down in New Mexico. They've built a device that is capable of unleashing a destructive power the world has never seen before. And we believe that we can use it to end the war. And if we don't use it, the only alternative is an invasion of mainland Japan. Because we all know the Japanese will never surrender unless they feel they have no choice. Now, an invasion of mainland Japan would have been horrifically bloody. I mean, horrifically bloody. And so, obviously, to this day, there was a lot of debate about was it right, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. But when you look at the alternative, how many American lives, how many Japanese lives it would have cost to invade Japan and bring them, to heal that way, I think it was the right choice, honestly. I do, And, he was the president when the war really was over. Nazi Germany's gone, Italy is gone, Japan's gone. Implemented the Marshall Plan. That was a huge deal. The Truman Doctrine established NATO. And also, the Cold War was about to really kick into high gear, but he wasn't like a big Cold Warrior guy. In fact, he wanted to keep things friendly between us and the Soviets. Obviously, it didn't work out that way, but he was not like someone who was pushing for the Cold War to start. Everybody thought he was a goner in the 1948 election, but he won. And then you have the Korean War. And that was really like one of the first big Cold War conflicts. But obviously, that was ended in a stalemate, but there was every chance that the entirety of Korea would have become a Chinese vassal state if not for the events of the Korean War. At first, the North almost won the whole thing. Well, first we almost won the South almost won the whole thing. Then the North almost won the whole thing, and then we came back to this awkward stalemate. But so there was the Korean War, and also Executive Order 9981, which prohibited discrimination in federal agencies and desegregated the armed forces. That's huge. I mean, that is one of the biggest steps. One of the single biggest steps in eliminating discrimination in the history of the country.
I'm so conflicted with this guy because how do you morally justify the use of an atomic bomb on two civilian cities? Like the fact that those were the chosen specific targets and not like military bases, I guess. But it also was used to end the war. Is it like a necessary sacrifice? Do you look at it from a utilitarian standpoint where it's, the number of people killed in the blasts versus the number of lives saved potentially?
Yeah.
I'm also just looking like he tried to get rid of a railroad strike by drafting the strikers into the military. Like that's kind of fucked.
Yeah.
But also like desegregating the military and I don't know. I really don't know where to put him.
I mean, really, his philosophy towards desegregation and his because generally he was a pretty progressive guy like FDR, really set the stage for what Kennedy would then go on to espouse a decade later, and what he would really champion, and LBJ would champion.
Yeah.
And so I like Truman. I think that it was necessary ultimately because, again, when you look at the alternative, the goal is to end the war. The goal is to win the war and end the war. And Japan made it very clear they would never surrender unless they were made to surrender. And I think that obviously...
And also it gave them a chance to surrender after Hiroshima. And they were like, no.
They refused, exactly.
So then we're like, okay.
Oh, yeah, well...
Have another one.
Exactly. And so I just think that an invasion of mainland Japan would have been so horrifying. I mean, the island hopping in the Pacific was already brutal enough. I mean, there are so many brutal battles in the Pacific in World War II. I think that if there is an efficient way that minimizes the risk of American lives to win the war, I think that was the right choice to make. Because again, if there was a mainland invasion, not only would many Americans die, but imagine the Japanese that would be killed in that effort. I mean, it would have been obscene.
Yeah.
And so,
but again, it's like civilians versus, Japanese military.
well, that's true. I don't want to minimize the significance of nuclear weapons or atomic weapons.
It's a tough choice, and I think he deserves some points for even just making that choice in the first place.
Oh yeah.
Whether it was right or wrong, like he was the one put in that position.
Yeah.
And he was decisive about it.
Yeah, yeah. It's an impossible choice in many ways.
Yeah.
But I think that ultimately, and look, and I don't want to minimize the significance of atomic weapons had never been used before in war, and they've never been used since in war. And so obviously that's bad. I mean, if atomic weapons existed but they had never been used in war, I wonder what the stigma around them would be today. But the fact that we've already crossed that bridge and we know how horrifying it is, in many ways, I think perhaps that helped prevent their use in more serious conflicts. Because
again, if you go to like the utilitarian perspective, the amount of potential lives saved.
Absolutely. I mean, it's in that sense, it's and again, I mean, I don't say this lightly, but it's almost a good thing because obviously we know what happens after this, the Cold War. If atomic weapons had never been used in war before here, it's not unfeasible to imagine what if a nuclear bomb had been set off in Berlin or in Vietnam or in Korea?
Mean, even having seen what they do, there were so many times where we were like this close.
Absolutely.
To ending up in nuclear war. So like, yeah. All right. So what do you I think I need to defer to your opinion on this because
my opinion is A. A feels right. A feels good.
Okay. I can agree to that. I was between like A and B. But I can agree to A.
All right, moving on to I Like Ike, Dwight Eisenhower, our president during the 1950s. Well, first of all, we have to address, obviously, legendary commander in World War II, the supreme commander of the Allied forces. That's huge. Don't want to downplay that. And as president, I mean, we had interstate highway system. That was huge. We have a lot of the early Cold War stuff. So the U-2 spy plane incident, the planning of the Bay of Pigs invasion, the Suez crisis, regime changes in Iran and Guatemala, starting our involvement in Vietnam, the creation of the CIA. But he also was a Republican who supported the New Deal, and that was good. I mean, a lot of people thought that once a Republican gets in again, they're going to scrap Social Security and they're going to scrap all this stuff. But he didn't. He actually kept it, or kept most of it anyway.
Encouraged segregation, or the end of segregation in D.C., including the federal government and the armed forces.
Also opposed
McCarthyism. Yeah.
Started NASA.
That's huge.
And also, we should say, when he was leaving office, he warned us about the military-industrial complex, which ended up being 100% prescient and true.
Damn, sorry, continue.
Well, I was just saying, this is a guy who was one of the biggest military commanders this country's ever produced, and yet he, at the end of his presidency, was warning about the military-industrial complex. Not one of his functionaries, him saying, you guys need to watch out for this. And I think that was really, to his credit, that was remarkable.
He got thanked by Martin Luther King Jr.
Yeah.
He got MLK's seal of approval.
Yeah, sending the army to integrate the Little Rock High School, that was him.
Yeah.
So
definitely A tier. I'm feeling.
Yeah. I
possibly think S, but definitely A.
Arguably right up there, I would say. In fact, actually, you know what? I think putting him in the same tier as Ulysses S. Grant feels right, because those two are so, such a similar backstory. Like, Grant was this awesome commander in the Civil War. Eisenhower was this awesome commander in World War II. And they both went on to become presidents in their own right. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, where's Eisenhower? There you go, A tier. Moving on to JFK. We're warming up now. We're heating up. We're getting to the really modern ones. JFK. I am a big JFK fan. I think that he was, he's a liberal from Massachusetts. He was a progressive, very much in the mold of FDR and Truman, and obviously helped avert nuclear disaster in the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's huge. Set the stage for Civil Rights Act and desegregation. Supported NASA. Was generally a Cold War guy, obviously. Well, actually, he tried to get us out of deepening involvement in Vietnam, and there's that's part of the long hypothesized the conspiracy of who might have killed him. I, for one, do not personally believe that there is convincing evidence that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in the assassination of Kennedy, but that's a whole other story. But it's well known that JFK and his skepticism of the military-industrial complex made him some powerful enemies, and some of them may have conspired to get him killed. But overall, I think he signed the first nuclear weapons treaty, established the Peace Corps, gave us the goal of landing a man on the moon within a decade, supported the civil rights movement.
Mm-hmm.
The new frontier domestic policy became LBJ's Great Society. And just in general, he was cool. I mean, JFK was the first president who we really know fucks. I mean, this is a guy. I mean, it's true. I mean, everyone.
He bagged Marilyn Monroe. Who's,
I mean, honestly, and
one of the sexiest women in all of history.
And it's not like Jackie Kennedy was a slouch. I mean, that was a hot lady, and but he was a little horn dog. He was screwing everybody, and so. He's just cool. I mean, he was in his debate with Nixon, the first televised debate. Everyone noticed this guy looks calm, cool, and collected on TV. And Nixon is this sweaty slob who can't stop stuttering, and, he's got this attractive family and, everything, he's just, the vibes were great with Kennedy. And I think that's terrific. And so I'm a big Kennedy fan. I think he's at least an A. Obviously he got assassinated, and so we'll never know. He was only in office for like 3 years, but he did great things, and he was on the way to doing more great things.
Yeah.
So
A is definitely a good place.
I mean, I might even, actually, you know what?
Do you want to make the case for S tier?
I was about to, but I think the only reason why I can't is the longevity. I think, sadly, because he was assassinated, we never got to see the full breadth of what he could do.
But that's not his fault.
Of course, it's not his fault. But I mean, it's not like we haven't been holding other presidents to that same standard.
That's true. Yeah, all the ones that just died.
Exactly.
In
so
30 days.
So,
but here's a little interesting bit of trivia. What was it? On March 22nd, 1962, Kennedy signed into law H.R. 5143, which abolished the mandatory death penalty for first-degree murder suspects in the District of Columbia. So he was like against the death penalty.
Ahead of his time.
Started moving away from that, which is
ahead of his time. And again, I can't stress this enough. He's the one who gave us the goal of making it to the moon within the decade, and by God, we did that too. So,
I know longevity is an issue, but also given how much he did in such a short time, I feel like he does deserve some credit for that. Because a lot of these guys did basically nothing but exist.
Yeah, that's true. No, he definitely does. I mean, honestly, if you want to make a case for S, I won't oppose it.
I'm making a case for S.
Okay, well then you go.
I think he did a lot of good stuff.
He did. He really did.
Even more. He was a cool guy.
Iconic, as we would say in 2020.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, LBJ. Now, the job that Kennedy started, LBJ finished in a lot of ways, both good and bad. The good was fantastic. The Great Society, the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, all fantastic. Great stuff. But of course, that also includes stuff like the Vietnam War, which vastly escalated in his time in office. But he was a champion of NASA. The Apollo program continued on. Obviously, we made it to the moon after all. Enacted the Higher Education Act, 1965, which established federally insured student loans. Signed the Immigration and Nationality Act, 1965, which laid the groundwork for U.S. immigration policy today.
Again, poverty and healthcare reform.
Yeah, the War on Poverty. Again, Civil Rights Act, Voting Rights Act. Definitely one of the more progressive presidents that we've had in our history. Really the only black mark on him, because he did so much to transform society. The only really big black mark is the Vietnam War. Because, think about it. This is a guy who was a Democrat from Texas, right? Historically, he wasn't as bad as some of the good old boys, but he definitely ran with that crowd. He was under no obligation to be this progressive, in fact, in a lot of ways, the good old boys in the South felt betrayed by him because they thought he was one of them, and he actually turned on them to do all of this liberal stuff. And so, the only area where I think it's not great is just how bad the Vietnam War got.
There's that, but I also there's another piece that may actually affect our JFK ranking too. Johnson continued the FBI's wiretapping of Martin Luther King Jr. that had been previously authorized by the Kennedy administration.
Oh yeah. Well, it's because he was
Attorney General Robert F. Kennedy.
Yeah, and I'll tell you why. It's because he was afraid of J. Edgar Hoover, like every president in the last 40 years was afraid of J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was one of the very few men, perhaps the only man in Washington, that even the presidents were afraid of, because they knew the influence that he had and how freely he could exercise his power as director of the FBI. J. Edgar Hoover ran the FBI like his own personal fiefdom. People that he didn't like, he destroyed. People that he did like, he propped up. And it was almost like a kind of, obviously the FBI did good work in that time as well, but it was, in a lot of ways, it was kind of like J. Edgar Hoover's, personal secret police. And he had dirt on everybody, and I mean everybody. So LBJ was afraid of him like everyone else was.
Fair point.
So I don't know. I feel like I was prepared to. Yeah, I feel like A. A feels good. Do you feel good with A?
I feel good with A.
Okay. There we go. Johnson.
Do you mind refreshing your screen sharing, because it's?
Oh yes, I can do that.
For me. Just want to make sure that the recording is actually picking it up too.
Okay. All right. Are you able to see that?
Give it a second. Yes, there we go.
Oh, perfect. So so moving along to Richard Nixon. Okay.
I can't do that as well as you can. You have a good impression.
My headphones are gonna fall off if I
can't
that up. But okay, so Nixon. He wanted to keep fighting in Vietnam, but eventually even he realized we can't keep doing this. So he wound down the Vietnam War, and it would eventually end under the next guy, who we'll get to. But he preferred a détente with the Soviet Union. He was technically the president during the Apollo 11 moon landings, even though that was obviously more of a product of Kennedy and Johnson.
Yeah.
Established the EPA, which I always give him props for. He was the man who set up the EPA, as well as OSHA, Occupational Safe and Health Administration. Also, I believe Earth Day became a thing during Nixon. So that's all good. He visited China, and opened up relations for the first time since the revolution there. He ended the draft. The draft ended under Nixon. This is the good stuff. The Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, Endangered Species Act, so on and so forth. Yeah, that's the good stuff. Of course, the bad stuff is the start of the war on drugs, the general revitalization of right-wing conservatism. Obviously, he was more hostile to racial progress than his predecessors were. He generally demonized a lot of non-white people.
Yep.
And yeah.
And that's it. Nothing else.
Yeah, and of course,
definitely no other bad things or scandals that he did.
Yeah, and of course, all of this is before we even get to also lowered the voting age from 21 to 18, so that was good. But yes, obviously we have to get to Watergate. Probably the most famous presidential scandal of history. I mean, there have been some contenders, but I think that's probably the biggest one ever is Watergate. The most famous one ever, certainly, by our modern standards. He was, his boys, CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, broke into the Watergate, even though, which it's the stupidest thing, because he was worried about losing in 1972, and he ended up crushing the other guy. I forget his name, but it was a landslide. He was worried for nothing, but he's so paranoid. He's like, I have to win. So you guys, well, he always denies giving the order, but
yeah,
people under him said, listen, you guys break into the Watergate, and they had to break in 4 times before they actually got what they wanted successfully. So these guys were not very bright, but of course these idiots get caught, and eventually the ties between them and the White House begin to unravel and be uncovered. Woodward and Bernstein, yada, yada, yada. Watergate, it's out in the open. Congress is pissed. Almost everyone is pissed. And it's like, listen, Dick, you gotta go. Listen, I mean, it's over. Game's up. You are not trusted anymore. And to his credit, he didn't try to fight it. He did resign. But yeah, so once again, we're back in that 19th century place where we really have to balance the good with the bad. I would say overall, the scandal is what, Watergate is what tarnishes his reputation more than anything. And it really does overshadow the good stuff he did, because there was some good there. I won't argue that there was nothing good. There was some good. But it's, he was dishonest. He lied to the American people. They were going to impeach him. And he had to go. So
I'm feeling C for this.
Yeah, C, because it's not like he was like Andrew Jackson genocide-y bad, but he wasn't good either. So, which brings us to his vice president, Gerald Ford. Now Ford is pretty cool, I believe, because he's a big football player in college. He played for the University of Michigan, and he actually turned down offers to play for the Lions and the Packers before going into politics, which is pretty cool. We could have had like an NFL linebacker president.
Wow.
We pretty much did. Which would have been wild. And overall, I mean, I don't know if I'd call him progressive, but he was, by the standards of the late 20th century, he was a more liberal Republican, which I feel like was In fact, he even had, I think, Nelson Rockefeller, who was a famously liberal Republican, as his vice president for a while. And so, yeah, I mean, so politically, I mean, I think he's okay, but the economy was not good during the forward years. This was the stagflation era, growing inflation leading to a recession, stagflation. He pardoned Nixon, which to this day remains very controversial. You know, was that a good idea or not?
But he also had an amnesty program for draft dodgers and deserters.
Yeah. And also continued the and he also continued the détente in the Cold War, which was good. I mean, you know, if you're having a Cold War, it's better to have it be more chill than the 60s or the 80s, as we'll get to. I feel like Ford is okay. I mean, he's not great, but he's okay. Better than Nixon in the vibe sense, but less consequential in the actual achievement sense. So I don't know. For some reason, I feel like Taft is a good comp for Ford, which would put him in C.
Is he like middle leaning towards bad or middle leaning towards good though?
I think probably the economy is what seals it for him, because the economy was really bad and he's about to lose to Carter, as we'll see in a minute.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's I just feel like if he was more popular, he would have held on, and he couldn't. I think the football stuff is cool, and just in general, I mean, you know, he's fine. You know,
yeah, he wasn't like a dick, but he just wasn't effective.
Yeah, just look at him. He's got that big dumb grin. I think he's inoffensive. But I will say probably the number one thing that he did that reverberates to this day is the pardon. I think that's something that we're still grappling with today.
Yeah.
With one of the other presidents that we'll talk about in a minute, but I feel like that ultimately did more harm than good.
I just wanted to hear your reasoning a little bit, but
which brings us to Jimmy Carter. Now, I think Jimmy Carter was ahead of his time in a lot of ways. Let's see, he did the Camp David Accords, he did the Strategic Arms Limitation talks, established the Department of Energy, the Department of Education. He was the first president to put solar panels on the White House. He was a big environment guy. Led the boycott of the Moscow Olympics. That's some of the good stuff. Obviously, personally, he's a great guy, super humble. To this day, he's still doing charity work, building homes, Habitats for Humanity, and all that. Did a lot for peace, which I think is really wonderful. But of course, there were a lot of problems too. The Iran hostage crisis, the energy crisis, the 3 Mile Island accident, which was a nuclear accident in Pennsylvania almost a decade before Chernobyl. Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. He had to end the détente, imposed a grain embargo on the Soviets. So, yeah, I mean, I think he was ahead of his time. I think he believed in peace, but circumstances just kind of overtook him. And that's why, we'll see what's about to happen to him. But I do like Carter. I think he really did mean well. And I think he's a good guy. And I really respect how, again, almost 50 years later, he's still doing all this charity stuff and he's still active in his 90s. I mean, God bless him. You know, I mean, I think that's wonderful.
That's got to be B tier, at least.
I think so. And also, he's the only president in, like, if it weren't for Carter, we would have had, like, 25 uninterrupted years of Republicans. And so I think,
That's true.
I think B. I think B feels good. And definitely ahead of his time. Which brings us to the Jipper.
Straight to hell tier.
Reagan. Oh boy. Reagan. Now here's a character, literally, because he was an actor for most of his career. Obviously Reagan he's the guy. Like, Nixon, like, lit the fire of being a right winger and being an electable president, and Reagan picked up that torch and ran with it. Yeah, I mean, he is the man who literally defined modern conservatism, and that has ultimately unleashed some pretty nasty forces.
He's the first like true kind of Christian ethno-nationalist.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it's so complicated with Reagan because ideologically, I'm not a fan of him, but it is really difficult to argue that his presidency was unsuccessful. I mean, the 80s, while far from perfect, were certainly a prosperous time. And I feel like it's not a coincidence he got reelected in such a massive landslide in 84. I do think there is something to be said for the feeling of optimism and confidence that he gave the country that we lacked in the 70s after all the scandals in Vietnam and everything. I think that Reaganomics ultimately is a failed concept, but the economy was good in the 80s. Obviously, we were back in a very intense competition with the Soviets. And in that sense, he did win the Cold War, I guess you could say.
He opposed the Voting Rights Act of 1965. He opposed the establishment of Martin Luther King.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the bad stuff
He
expanded the
also
war on
alluded to
drugs.
claims that King was associated with communists.
Oh yeah, no, yeah, I mean he was a right winger. I mean, there's no doubt about that. But yeah, expanded the war on drugs. He was slow to respond to AIDS. You had Iran Contra, that was not great. Bombed Libya, but also and also invaded Grenada. But the economy was good. The country was feeling pretty good about itself again. Survived an assassination attempt, and we did give Teddy credit for that. And the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore, so
yeah. I hate this guy so much. And
yeah,
I think he contributed so much to a lot of the
believe me, I take no
enabling
joy.
the kind of systematic inequalities in this country to continue to exist to this day.
Yeah, but believe me, I take no joy in defending Reagan this much. I really don't. It makes my skin crawl. But I can't deny that if I had to choose to be the age that I am now in the 80s versus the 70s or the 60s or pretty much any time prior, I would choose the 80s. I mean, it's just it just seems like everyone says it was a better time than the 70s. The economy was good where it was in the toilet before. The government was more respected than it was before. And you know what? In fact, we talk about vibes with several of these presidents. I think Reagan is a great vibes president. I think his ideology is not my ideology, and I don't agree with it. I think it was wrong. But one can't deny that the vibes under Reagan were some of the best they've ever been.
Under
And so,
him, yes. Re-examining from the future,
yeah.
bad vibes.
Well, yeah. I
But
mean, it's and so it's complicated.
yeah.
But I do think he belongs in the upper tier by virtue of those things.
I
And
will agree to D. I don't know if I can agree to C.
so you're saying D, and I'm saying upper tier, which would be B or above.
Oh, you
So
think B or oh Jesus.
yeah,
Okay.
I think there's enough there to justify a case for him being in the upper tier. Again, ideologically, I do not agree. I have a lot of problems, but I think that when you judging off of the barometers of what makes a successful president, I think he was successful. And so, how about we split this? We split the difference. I would say B. You would say D. So how about
I
we
mean,
go C?
ideally I'd say F, but if you want to go C, I'll be lenient.
I mean, I don't think
If
it's
you
fair
want
to
to,
put him in the same range as Andrew Jackson. I don't think that's
I
fair.
don't. I mean, the war on drugs was so bad.
Yeah, and I mean, I guess you could
It did
say
so much damage, and like trickle down economics did so much. Again, this
yeah.
goes back to like, which kind of moral perspective do you take? And I think if you take a utilitarian perspective when looking at Reagan and just the damage he's done and how much he's stagnated,
Mm.
um, the economic growth and prosperity of minorities in this country, it's pretty brutal.
Oh yeah, and also
So,
I don't want to minimize the AIDS stuff because he definitely turned a blind eye to that, and that led to
yeah,
many deaths. So I don't know, but I mean C is still lower tier, so I feel like that's can we say C?
I can say C. Yeah.
There we go. And obviously, just if you're miraculously still watching, viewer, this is our ranking. So you may disagree, and that's totally fine. But this is just the opinion of these two idiots. So, all right, George H.W. Bush. H.W. I mean, so okay. Bush is a very rich man, but it's not like he didn't also lead a pretty accomplished life. I mean, he was a veteran. He was an oil man. He made his own, he made even more money in oil. I was about to say he made his own fortune. He already had a fortune, but he made an even
Yeah.
bigger fortune in oil. And he did real work in that. He got elected to Congress. He was the CIA director. He was ambassador to China. He was ambassador to the UN. And then of course he was vice president, and then he got elected president. So this is a guy who did achieve a lot in his life on his own strengths. I mean, as far as his actual presidency, the final years of the Cold War was him.
But he didn't really do much for that. He just kind
No,
of
yeah,
oversaw the collapse.
pretty much, yeah. But I mean, the Kuwait War, I think we can give that to him. Iraq invaded, and he said, we're getting all of our allies together. We're going to go in together to push them out. And then, unlike his dipshit son, he decided to stop there because he realized this is the extent of our legal authority. Our job is to liberate Kuwait, and that's it. And he did that, and we're not going further. And I think that's very noble.
Yeah.
So there is that. Also did the invasion of Panama. Also did NAFTA. NAFTA is not ultimately that good. But he did do the Americans with Disabilities Act. So that's good. But I think wait, hold on. I think he also, yeah, he was the one who nominated fucking what's his face, Clarence Thomas to the Supreme Court. So that's at least that's a huge demerit. That's at least 2 tiers down for me.
Wait, sorry, repeat that.
He nominated Clarence Thomas to be on the Supreme Court, so that's a big demerit for me. So I don't know. Again, some good, some bad. Ultimately, didn't rock the boat that much. He wasn't as hard-edged as Reagan. I mean, he was still definitely a conservative, but he wasn't as confrontational as Reagan was. He kind of wanted to reframe it in a more conciliatory mindset. So I don't know. I mean, if we've put Reagan at C, I feel like he's certainly less consequential. And so, I don't know, D? Is that too harsh?
I was gonna say keep him at C.
Okay, yeah, honestly, I can live with that.
If you're not willing to push Reagan down to D, then I think Bush Senior should stay at C.
I can live with that. And I do think, even though I don't agree with most of his positions politically, I do think he was a principled guy, and he seems pretty genuine. And
Yeah.
and I can respect that. So, all right, Bubba, Bill Clinton.
Immediate points for playing the sax.
Yeah, well, that was very cool. Going on Arsenio Hall and playing the sax was awesome. Um, Honestly, nobody, uh, all of the big name Democrats like what's his name, Cuomo, uh, Andrew Cuomo's dad, who was governor of New York forever, Mario
Mhm.
Cuomo. Like all these big name Democrats, all of them were scared to run against Bush in '92 because they all thought he would win. The Kuwait War was a huge deal. That was a big success. It was the first war that was really televised in real time. And everyone thought, he's successful. The economy is not great, but not terrible. So he's going to win again. And so none of the big name Democrats ran. But Clinton ran. He said, you know what? I think I can do it. And he ran, and he ended up winning pretty surprisingly. And I think that, you know, it's tough because we know that Kennedy was having all kinds of extramarital affairs, and we think he's cool for that. Clinton had an extramarital affair, and it almost cost him his presidency.
Yeah.
So it's almost and I like Kennedy, so how can I hold it against Clinton? Maybe it's just because Clinton is just not as sexy as Kennedy was.
But also it was more than an affair. I mean, it was sexual misconduct, including rape and harassment and assault.
Yeah. Well,
like it wasn't just cheating on Hillary Clinton. It was like,
and actually, if you want to get into what the impeachment was, it was actually about lying under oath because when he was
but I'm saying the comparison to John F. Kennedy is not quite the same because it's more than an affair.
Well, yeah, and also obviously when you look at the power dynamics now, we obviously would frown on that kind of relationship. Obviously, he was the one in the position of power, and she was an intern, and so that was definitely inappropriate to engage in that in any capacity. And so, but let's address some of the good stuff first, because there was a lot of good stuff. No one had ever appointed as many women to their cabinet as he did. He was the first to really push for more parity in appointing women to the cabinet, including Madeleine Albright as Secretary of the State. That was huge. First woman Secretary of State. Put Ruth Bader Ginsburg on the Supreme Court. Did a bunch of stuff. State Children's Health Insurance Program. Did the Dayton Peace Agreement, which helped resolve the big Bosnian Kosovo situation. Helped kind of shift things as the Soviet Union had collapsed, and helped expand NATO, bring former Soviet countries into NATO. Did the Camp David Summit, the Oslo Accords, the Israeli-Palestinian peace process, Northern Ireland peace process. He was generally, he tried to do a major healthcare reform, which ultimately Obama finished what he started there. He was generally a pretty liberal guy. Not totally, obviously. There was NAFTA, and there was it was a very tough on crime president, but he did a lot of good liberal stuff. Pretty much. Of course, the big black mark on him is he was almost impeached. Well, he was impeached, just not removed.
Yeah.
And it's very controversial to this day because there was definitely a political element to the impeachment. There were definitely the Republicans who controlled Congress, or at least the House at the time under Newt Gingrich, clearly had it out from him from the start. First it was the Whitewater stuff, and then that investigation just morphed into what became the Lewinsky business. But basically, there were forces that were definitely looking for anything to get this guy out. And ultimately, they did find something that stuck. And again, it was not right. I mean, by our standards today, and even by the standards of just any time, it was wrong for the president to take advantage of a 22-year-old intern. But even Monica Lewinsky will tell you it was always complicated. It wasn't like him. It wasn't like him being forceful in that sense. It was him being in the position of power and leveraging that power to beguile an impressionable young woman.
I mean, yeah, what it was complicated with the Monica Lewinsky
But she really did love him
relationship. But
for a time.
she wasn't the only one. In
No,
1994, Paula Jones initiated a sexual harassment lawsuit against Clinton, claiming he had made unwanted advances towards her in 1991.
Yeah, and that was, I would
in 1998, Kathleen Wiley alleged that Clinton had groped her in a hallway in 1993. 1998, Juanita Broderick alleged that Clinton had raped her in the spring of 1978.
Yeah, I mean, the Paula Jones stuff, that was really bad. I mean, that was, if anything, that was even more egregious than...
Hold on. Yeah? All right, I'll be down in a few minutes. All right, we gotta wrap this up.
Yes, but yeah, that was really bad. But yeah. So, but ultimately, I don't know. I think you did a pretty good job. I don't think that. I mean, he was impeached, but I don't think it would have. I don't think it was enough to move a duly elected president from office, and that ultimately, it didn't happen. But I don't know. I think he did. I think he did a pretty good job overall, ultimately. And so, how about
I think B tier.
B tier? Okay, we can. Yeah. B's good. W.
I wouldn't put him on the same level as, Ulysses S. Grant.
No, probably not.
So,
W.
W.
Okay, so 9/11 happens.
Yeah.
I think the war in Afghanistan was going to happen, no matter what. I mean, unlike Iraq, we knew for a fact the Taliban was using Afghanistan as a base. So I feel like after 9/11, the war in Afghanistan was inevitable, whoever was going to be in the White House. Obviously, the big problem with W is the Iraq War, because that was a war that was fully started on false pretenses. W always had a complex because he felt like he needed to finish what Daddy couldn't. And yeah.
And also,
yeah.
Dick Cheney?
Dick Cheney, yeah,
that kind of like
a monster.
Him.
Yeah. And also, I mean,
hard to say if W made any of his own decisions, really.
Yeah, yeah, no, he was mainly a vessel for a lot of the people that were in his cabinet, in his administration. But also, in many ways, you could argue he never should have been president in the first place, because the 2000 election was highly disputed. And if they had properly counted those ballots, I think we now know that Al Gore actually won the recount in Florida. But of course, the Supreme Court said, you straight up cannot continue counting. We're calling it for Bush. The Supreme Court handed the presidency to Bush. And so you could very easily argue he never should have been president in the first place, but he was. And this is what we got. So Iraq was bad. The war on terror and the rampant, just the rampant escalation of domestic surveillance and a lot of that bad stuff was him. He wanted to privatize Social Security and Medicare. Fortunately, he didn't do that. He wasn't able to do that. I will say, I mean, it's not like he was as ideologically right-wing as Reagan. He was definitely deeply conservative, but I don't think he was as much of a flamethrower.
No, but he Reagan also just wasn't super effective as a president.
No, yeah. Well, and unfortunately, the stuff he was most effective at was bad stuff, like the Iraq War and the Patriot Act and all that stuff. Also, his handling of Hurricane Katrina was disastrous, so that was bad. And also, the Great Recession started under his tenure as well, so that's also bad. So, just a lot of bad, mainly. I feel like Herbert Hoover is a pretty good comp for Bush.
Yeah, I can agree with that.
Obama. Now we've finally entered into the presidents that you and I can personally remember and were personally conscious of during their time. I think Obama's fantastic. I mean, so starting with the obvious, our first non-white president, that's great. A huge moment for progress and equality. An incredible personal story. I mean, just one of the best presidential biographies we've ever had.
One of the best public speakers we've ever had.
Unbelievable. I mean,
Dude is so well spoken. Oh my god.
Right up there with Kennedy. I mean, he just had the gift. There's just no question about that.
And like he wrote his own speeches too. It wasn't like his staff.
In the way that only he could, honestly.
Yeah.
The Affordable Care Act was huge. Obviously did a lot for the climate. Put Sotomayor and Kagan in the Supreme Court.
We'll say drone striking children. Bad.
Yeah, the drone strikes were not good. But he did normalize relations with Cuba. That's good. He did the Iran nuclear deal. That was good. He put us on the path to recovery from the recession. It took longer than expected, but got us there. The American Recovery and Reinvestment Act was huge in helping with that. Good president. I mean, honestly, I just, I mean, certainly, I'm so glad that I had a chance to observe and be able to remember his time in office because, I mean, again, I mean, he's just such a gifted public speaker, as you said. I mean, he's a gifted communicator and a tremendous leader, I think. Won the Nobel Peace Prize. And I think he just did a great job. I mean, he was definitely liberal, but, it's not like he was a bomb thrower. I mean, he was always trying, in fact, to a fault, I would argue, trying to find consensus.
Yeah.
Just a good dude. It's nice to just have a good dude in the Oval Office.
It was like a refreshing president.
Honestly, I mean,
like a lot of people say he wasn't that effective, but like there's nothing he did that, I mean, aside from like the drone strikes, which were not great, there's nothing like super scandalous and bad that he did.
That's
like,
the incredible
his main
thing.
scandal was not even his fault. It was because Trump was like, show us your birth certificate.
Oh,
and he was like, I shouldn't have to.
Yeah, I mean, none of his cabinet members had to resign in disgrace. He was never tarred with any kind of corruption or anything. The guy was just steady. I mean, that's the beautiful thing. And honestly, and anybody who says that Obama wasn't effective can't tell me that they think that McCain or Romney would have been more effective. So, yeah, I mean, for me, he's very Kennedy-esque. Am I gonna say S tier?
I don't know if we can say S tier personally.
That may
I don't know if he was effective. I don't know if he did enough to be S tier. Unless you can convince me otherwise.
I feel like
what's your S tier case? Like
between his personal biography, being the first non-white president, and his real accomplishments, getting us out of the Great Recession, the Affordable Care Act. I think there is a case there. I think the case is very similar to Kennedy in that, it's not like he was a wartime leader, but there's definitely his leadership in putting, and maybe we need more time between his presidency to kind of really fairly assess his legacy. But I feel like he's the one who helped pivot us away from the War of Terror and put more emphasis on countering China and countering Russia. And that's, of course, hugely important now. And ended the war in Iraq. That's huge. Wanted to get us out of Afghanistan, tried multiple times, but it kept getting delayed.
I think if we're going based on vibes, I can see S. I can see the case for S tier.
And also when you consider the first president period, Washington was a slave owner, putting the first non-white and to date only non-white president up there with him, I think that feels good. I mean, don't you think?
There's this great clip from Zach Galifianakis' Two Ferns where he interviewed Obama, and he was like, so what is it like to be the last black president of the United States?
And also, I will say I am biased because he is an inspiration to me personally as well, and so I will say that. But yeah, I think S feels good for me at least. And are you okay with that?
I'm happy with S. Yeah.
And now we come to 45, our final president. Actually, you know what? I'm going to leave that sentence there. Our final president. At least in his mind, he's our final president.
Technically, he believes he was what, the like 8th president or the 18th president or something, because the like inauguration stopped being on a certain date and switched to a Tuesday.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's some conspiracy out there. It's stupid.
The Don. Another president that lost the popular vote but won the election. Was there
Kind
collusion?
of, yeah, potential Russia collusion.
Yeah.
Kind of trashed the economy.
He did. He said that he was going to stand up for the forgotten men of women, and all he did in terms of domestic policy was pass a giant tax cut for rich people and giant corporations.
Yep. He wasted tons of money on an ineffective border wall.
He ripped literal babies out of their mother's arms at the border, put a bunch of right-wingers on the Supreme Court, tried to repeal Obamacare, thankfully failed.
Let hundreds of thousands die by ignoring coronavirus.
COVID, said you should inject bleach into your veins to cure COVID. Had a bromance with Kim Jong-un. Got us out of the Paris Climate Agreement.
In terms of like damage,
got impeached twice.
Yeah, this guy has got to be like D or
Let's
F.
emphasize that. Got impeached twice. And once for
only the third president ever to get impeached, right?
And once for inciting a fucking insurrection.
Yes, he tried to do a coup.
Yeah.
Against our own country. Like, this guy sucks.
So
basically started a cult of personality. Not great.
Yes, a cult leader who is now trying to return.
Also just a bad business person because he lost
totally
like
failed.
some $1 billion in a single year.
The most lyingest president in American history, and that's including Nixon.
Doesn't pay taxes.
Doesn't pay taxes.
As far as we know.
He did the Muslim ban.
Started the birther movement against Obama before he was even president. Before Trump was president, he started the birther movement.
And did we mention the coup? I think we should mention the coup again.
We should probably mention it again, yeah. As many times as it takes. He tried to do a coup.
Yeah, and
against the United States.
And again, we should emphasize the coup was after hundreds of thousands of Americans died in a pandemic he ignored.
Yeah. So are we thinking D or are we thinking F?
Well, we've established at this point that F tier is going to hell. And Donald J. Trump is going to hell. So
yeah, I think going to hell tier should be a tier below F.
Maybe.
There's just not an option for that.
But for now, I mean, because look at the presidents we have an F tier. We have slave owners. We have presidents who died immediately. We have presidents who put us on the path to the Civil War. And look at all of these. We have portraits and we have black and white photographs. It feels like the only modern color photograph that we have in the lowest possible tier should be the Don. Yeah,
but also, I think we could also just leave it where it is right now, and it still works.
Well, actually, you know what we can do? This is how we'll end it. We're gonna add a row right here.
You can add a row?
Oh yeah, you can do rows, and I'm gonna make this row.
Straight to hell. Straight to hell.
Yeah, and this is well, you know what? I'm not even well, yeah, well, I could do that. Yes, straight to hell, and dash Donald J. Trump tier. There he is.
Yay! We did it. We love America.
Ladies and gentlemen, we give you our definitive ranking of all. We didn't mention Biden. Biden is still in progress, but
he's still in progress.
But I think he's doing a good job. You know what?
Like B tier, probably.
Hot take. I think he's doing a good job. So, but yeah, it's still in progress. We don't know how his story is going to end yet.
Yeah.
But this is our definitive ranking of all of the presidents. What a beautiful list. What a journey we've been on. We've learned so much. We've cracked some jokes. We've gained some insights. We've ranked them all. And here it is.
If you compare this to a standard bell curve, turns out most of our presidents are terrible. Happy 4th of July, everyone.
So we hope that anyone who has inexplicably watched to the end has enjoyed this. We'll have to split this up into multiple episodes at this point, I think.
Probably. Yeah.
But I think this was a worthwhile.
Agree or disagree with our findings? Leave a comment and let us know.
Yeah, screenshot
if you think
this.
Donald J. Trump sucks, leave a like. If you think he's good, don't subscribe to our channel. We don't want you here.
Yeah. In fact, actually, you know what? If you think he's great, don't do anything. If you think he's terrible, don't do anything. And that way we'll register.
If you think he's great, die.
You can join in going to hell tier.
Just go. Go to a different website. Go to Facebook. Hang out on Facebook. We're not there.
Yeah, no, we know you're already on Truth Social, so just don't even worry about it.
Yeah.
But well, this is
untapped market. We could start podcasting on Truth Social, and
well, we
should do a speed run to see how quickly we can get banned off of Truth Social.
Well, we might have to, because as I'm sure you've seen, Twitter's going to hell in a handbasket. So
yeah, that's burning down quite fast.
Yeah, and so there you go. But what a journey. Any closing thoughts on this?
I think bringing it full circle. I think as long as you recognize the flaws that this country has, then it's okay to celebrate it and to say we're trying to do better.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing.
Couldn't have put it better myself. Well, with that, thank you all so much for tuning in. We appreciate you being here so much, and we are so glad to be back doing this. And we will speak with you again very soon. All right. Goodbye, everybody. And happy 4th.